The morning mist clung to the pine forest like smoke from a dying campfire as Sam Harrison guided his mule through the dense Arizona wilderness. At 42, Sam had spent the better part of 2 decades cutting timber in these mountains, his weathered hands telling the story of countless days wielding an axe. The year was 1887, and the territorial disputes between settlers and Apache tribes had reached a boiling point, making every venture into the deep woods a calculated risk. Sam's breath formed small clouds in the crisp autumn air as he searched for the perfect stand of ponderosa pines. His logging operation, though modest, provided timber for the growing town of Prescott, where railroad expansion demanded an endless supply of wood. The isolation suited him, a man of few words who preferred the company of trees to people. The sound that stopped him cold wasn't the crack of falling timber or the call of a mountain bird. It was something far more disturbing, the quiet whimper of a human voice, young and filled with pain. Following the sound through a grove of aspens, their golden leaves carpeting the forest floor, Sam discovered a sight that would haunt him for the rest of his days. Chained to a massive oak tree, his wrists raw and bleeding, sat a young Apache boy who couldn't have been more than 14 years old. The boy's dark eyes, wide with fear and defiance, met Sam's blue ones across the small clearing. The chains were crude but effective, heavy iron links that had clearly been salvaged from somewhere, perhaps a mining operation. The boy's traditional Apache clothing was torn and dirty, suggesting he'd been there for days. Despite his obvious suffering, there was something unbroken in his gaze, a fierce pride that reminded Sam of the wild mustangs that roamed these mountains. "Jesus Christ," Sam muttered under his breath, dropping his axe and approaching slowly, hands visible and empty. "What in God's name happened to you, son?" The boy said nothing, his jaw set in stubborn silence. Sam could see the wariness in his eyes. This white man could be friend or foe, and there was no way to know which until actions spoke louder than words. Sam knelt beside the tree, examining the chains. They were secured with a heavy padlock, rusty but solid. "I'm going to get you out of here," he said quietly, his voice carrying the authority of a man accustomed to solving problems with his hands. "But I need to go back to my camp for tools. You understand English?" A barely perceptible nod. "Good. I'll be back within the hour. You have my word." As Sam hurried back through the forest, his mind raced with questions. Who had done this? Was it punishment from the boy's own people, or something more sinister? The tensions between the Apache and white settlers had escalated dramatically in recent months, with stories of raids and reprisals spreading through every trading post and saloon from Tucson to Flagstaff. True to his word, Sam returned with bolt cutters, water, and dried meat. The boy watched every movement as Sam worked to cut through the chains, the metal finally giving way with a sharp snap that echoed through the forest. The moment he was free, the boy stumbled but refused Sam's offered hand, struggling to his feet with the stubborn independence that seemed to define him. Sam handed him the water gourd, which the boy accepted after a moment's hesitation, drinking deeply while never taking his eyes off his rescuer. "What's your name?" Sam asked. After a long pause, the boy answered in accented but clear English. "Ayanna." "I'm Sam. Sam Harrison." He gestured toward his camp. "You're hurt, and you need food and rest. Will you come with me?" Ayanna's hesitation was understandable. Trust between their peoples was as rare as water in the desert. But hunger and exhaustion won out over caution, and he nodded slowly. As they walked through the forest, Sam stole glances at the boy beside him. There were scars on Ayanna's arms and back, some old, some fresh. This wasn't the first time he'd suffered violence, and Sam found himself wondering what kind of life could leave such marks on someone so young. The camp was simple, a canvas tent, a fire pit ringed with stones, and the basic tools of Sam's trade. But it was clean and organized, reflecting the disciplined mind of a man who had learned to take care of himself in the wilderness. Sam prepared a simple meal of beans and salt pork, while Ayanna sat by the fire, finally allowing exhaustion to show in his posture. The boy ate ravenously, but with careful dignity, never forgetting his manners despite his obvious hunger. "Who did this to you?" Sam finally asked as they shared the meal. Ayanna was quiet for so long that Sam thought he wouldn't answer. Then, staring into the fire, he spoke. "My own people, the Council of Elders. They said I brought shame to the tribe." "What kind of shame?" "I spoke against war, against the raids on settler families." Ayana's voice was steady, but Sam could hear the pain beneath the words. "I said we should find another way, that too much blood had been spilled on both sides." Sam set down his tin cup, understanding beginning to dawn. "So they chained you to that tree as punishment? To teach me the price of betraying Apache ways? To let me choose, die as a coward or return and fight as a warrior should?" The fire crackled between them, casting dancing shadows on their faces. Sam had heard stories of tribal justice, but seeing its effects on this young man was different. Here was a boy, barely more than a child, who had paid a terrible price for speaking his conscience. "Well," Sam said finally, "you're safe now, at least for tonight." But even as he spoke the words, Sam knew that safety was a luxury neither of them could take for granted. The forest around them held dangers from all sides. Apache war parties who would see Ayana as a traitor, white settlers who would shoot first and ask questions later, and the harsh reality of survival in a land that forgave no mistakes. As night fell over the mountains, Sam kept the fire burning bright, knowing that tomorrow would bring decisions that would change both their lives forever. Across the flames, Ayana had finally allowed himself to sleep, but even in rest, his hand remained close to the knife Sam had given him. The lumberjack who had started the day thinking only of trees and timber now found himself responsible for a young life, and facing questions that had no easy answers in a territory where the line between right and wrong was often drawn in blood. Dawn broke gray and cold over the mountain camp, with storm clouds gathering on the eastern horizon. Sam had slept fitfully, waking several times to check on Ayana, who seemed to rest more peacefully than he had in days. The boy's face, relaxed in sleep, showed just how young he really was, a reminder that made Sam's chest tighten with an emotion he hadn't felt since his own son had died of fever 15 years ago. Over a breakfast of cornbread and coffee, Sam studied his unexpected companion. In daylight, Ayana's injuries were more apparent. Rope burns on his wrists, bruises along his ribs, and a haunted quality in his dark eyes that spoke of wounds deeper than flesh. "You can't go back to your people," Sam said finally, breaking the comfortable silence. "Not after what they did." Ayana stared into his coffee cup. "I have nowhere else to go. A man without a tribe is like a leaf without a tree. He dries up and blows away." "That's Apache wisdom?" "My grandmother's wisdom. She raised me after my parents died in a cavalry attack when I was 7. Ayana's voice carried the weight of old grief. "She taught me that honor matters more than life, but she also taught me that sometimes the greatest honor comes from standing alone for what is right." Sam nodded slowly. He recognized the look in the boy's eyes, the same stubborn integrity that had cost Sam his position as a cavalry scout years ago when he'd refused to participate in what he considered a massacre of peaceful Apache families. "There's a town about 2 days' ride from here," Sam said. "Prescott. It's growing fast with the railroad coming through. A man can make an honest living there if he's willing to work." "A white man can. You speak English better than half the men in that town. You're smart, and you're not afraid of hard work. That counts for something." Ayana was quiet for a long moment, then asked, "Why are you helping me? Your people and mine have been killing each other for years." It was a fair question, and Sam found himself thinking of his own son, Tommy, who would have been about Ayana's age if he'd lived. But there was more to it than that. Something about the boy's courage in standing up for peace, even knowing the cost, reminded Sam of the man he'd tried to be before life had worn him down. "Because you did the right thing," Sam said simply. "And sometimes that's reason enough." Their conversation was interrupted by the sound of horses approaching through the forest. Sam immediately reached for his rifle while motioning for Ayana to move behind the tent. Through the trees, he could see 4 riders picking their way carefully through the undergrowth, white men, armed and moving with the deliberate caution of a search party. "Harrison," one of them called out. "Sam Harrison, we know you're in there." Sam recognized the voice of Jake Morrison, a rancher from the valley below who'd had several run-ins with Apache raiders. Morrison was a hard man, made harder by the loss of his brother in a recent attack. "What do you want, Morrison?" Sam called back, keeping his rifle ready, but not openly threatening. The four men rode into the clearing, their horses nervous and snorting. Morrison, a lean man with graying hair and cold eyes, took in the camp with a sweeping glance that lingered on the 2 coffee cups by the fire. "We're tracking an Apache boy," Morrison said. "Escaped from his people yesterday. He's dangerous, probably scouting for a war party." Sam felt Ayanna tense behind the tent, but the boy remained hidden. "Haven't seen any Apache," Sam lied smoothly. "Just been cutting timber." "Mind if we look around?" This from Morrison's second-in-command, a younger man named Peters, whose hand rested casually on his gun. "But I do mind, actually. This is my camp, and you're not welcome here." The tension in the clearing was thick enough to cut with an axe. Morrison's eyes narrowed as he noticed the extra supplies, the second bedroll that Sam hadn't had time to hide. "You sure about that, Harrison? Because harboring hostile Indians is a serious crime in this territory." Sam stepped forward, his rifle now clearly visible in his hands. "And trespassing on a man's property is serious business, too. I suggest you boys ride on." For a moment, it seemed like violence was inevitable. The four ranchers were clearly spoiling for a fight, and Sam knew they wouldn't hesitate to shoot first and justify it later. But Morrison was smart enough to recognize that starting a gunfight with a man of Sam's reputation would be costly, even if they won. "We'll be watching, Harrison," Morrison said finally, pulling his horse's head around. "This territory's got no room for Indian lovers." As the four men rode away, Sam remained tense until their hoofbeats faded entirely. Only then did Ayanna emerge from behind the tent, his face pale but determined. "They'll be back," Ayanna said quietly. "Maybe, but not today." Sam began breaking down the camp with efficient movements. "We need to move anyway. There's a cabin about 10 miles north, up in the high country. We can lay low there for a few days while we figure out our next move." As they packed their supplies, Ayanna asked, "Why didn't you just turn me over to them? It would have been easier." Sam paused in his work, looking at the young man, who had already shown more courage than most men twice his age. "Easy and right aren't always the same thing, son. I learned that the hard way." The journey to the high country cabin took them through some of the most beautiful and treacherous terrain in the territory. Ancient pines towered overhead, while mountain streams carved through granite gorges, their water so clear it seemed like liquid crystal. But the beauty was deceptive. This was country where a wrong step could mean a fatal fall, where weather could change from pleasant to deadly in minutes. As they climbed higher, Sam shared stories of his years in these mountains, while Ayanna spoke of his childhood among the Apache, of lessons learned from his grandmother about the old ways and the importance of living in harmony with the land. "She used to say that the earth doesn't belong to us," Ayanna said as they rested beside a mountain stream. "We belong to the earth. All people, Apache, white, Mexican, we're all just temporary guardians." "Wise woman," Sam said. "Sounds like she raised you right." "She tried to. But the world is changing so fast. The old ways, the new ways. Sometimes it feels like there's no place for someone caught between them." Sam understood that feeling all too well. He'd spent years caught between his loyalty to the army and his growing conviction that the Indian wars were unnecessary and brutal. It had cost him his career and most of his friends, but it had also allowed him to sleep at night. The cabin, when they finally reached it, was a solid structure built of hand-hewn logs and chinked with mountain clay. Sam had built it himself as a retreat during the harshest winter months, and it was well stocked with supplies and ammunition. As they settled in for the night, the first drops of rain began to fall, quickly building into a steady downpour that would make tracking difficult for anyone who might be following them. By the fire's warm light, Sam watched Ayanna carefully cleaning and oiling the rifle Sam had given him, his movements efficient and practiced. "Your grandmother teach you to shoot?" Sam asked. "My uncle. He said a man should know how to protect himself and those he cares about." Ayanna looked up from the rifle. "But he also taught me that the greatest warrior is the one who wins without fighting." Outside, the storm intensified, rain drumming against the cabin's roof and wind howling through the pines. But inside, The two unlikely companions felt safe for the first time in days, sharing stories and slowly beginning to trust each other with the deeper truths of their lives. Neither man spoke of what tomorrow might bring, but both understood that their fates were now intertwined in ways that would test everything they believed about courage, loyalty, and the meaning of family. 3 days of steady rain had turned the mountain trails into ribbons of mud and made tracking nearly impossible, but it had also given Sam and Ayanna time to plan. The cabin felt like a sanctuary, but they both knew it was temporary. Sooner or later, they would have to face the world outside and the dangers it held for both of them. On the 4th morning, the rain stopped and brilliant sunshine broke through the clouds, turning the wet forest into a cathedral of light and shadow. Sam was splitting firewood outside the cabin when he saw them, a line of Apache warriors moving silently through the trees below, their painted faces and traditional weapons marking them as a war party. "Ayanna," he called quietly. "Company coming." The young man appeared in the doorway, and Sam saw recognition and fear flicker across his face. "It's my uncle, Cochise," Ayanna said, using the name of his mother's brother, not the famous chief. "He leads the war council now." "The same uncle who taught you to shoot?" "The same one who voted to chain me to that tree." Sam counted at least 12 warriors, all armed and moving with the deadly efficiency of men who had spent their lives at war. They surrounded the cabin but made no immediate move to attack, instead waiting in the tree line like patient predators. A single figure stepped forward, a man in his 50s with iron-gray hair and scars that spoke of many battles. His eyes, so similar to Ayanna's, were hard as flint as he surveyed the cabin and the two men standing before it. "Ayanna," Cochise called out in Apache, then switched to English. "You bring shame to our family. Come home and die with honor, or stay with the white man and die as a dog." Ayanna stepped forward, his rifle held loosely in his hands, but ready for use. "I brought no shame, uncle. I spoke for peace because I have seen too much death." "You spoke like a woman, like a child who fears the sound of battle." Cochise's voice carried both anger and genuine pain. "Your grandmother filled your head with foolish dreams of peace with the white eyes who murdered your parents." "My grandmother taught me wisdom. She said that a warrior's greatest victory is the one that prevents a war." Sam watched the exchange, understanding enough of the family dynamics to recognize the deep love that existed alongside the conflict. This wasn't just about tribal politics. It was about a man watching his nephew choose a path that led away from everything their people had fought and died for. "The white man beside you," Cochise continued, his gaze shifting to Sam. "Does he know what you are? Does he know that Apache blood runs in his veins?" Sam felt something shift in his understanding. He'd assumed Ayanna was full Apache, but now he could see the subtle differences, the slightly lighter skin, the features that blended two heritages. "My father was a cavalry sergeant," Ayanna said quietly, answering Sam's unspoken question. "He fell in love with my mother during a peace negotiation. When the army discovered their relationship, he was discharged in disgrace. When the Apache learned of it, my mother was cast out. They died together, trying to protect a wagon train from raiders who didn't care about their mixed blood." The revelation hung in the air like smoke from a dying fire. Sam now understood the complexity of Ayanna's position, rejected by both worlds, belonging fully to neither, yet trying to build bridges between them. "You see," Cochise said, his voice softer now, but no less determined. "You are caught between two peoples who will never accept you. Come home, nephew. Fight with your mother's people, and die with honor if that is your fate." "No." Ayanna's voice was steady, final. "I've chosen my path. I will not kill innocent people to prove my loyalty to anyone." The standoff stretched on for long minutes, tension thick as morning fog. Sam could see the other warriors growing restless, hands moving to weapons, horses stamping impatiently. One wrong word, one sudden movement, and blood would water the mountain soil. Then Morrison and his men appeared from the north, riding hard and raising dust like a cavalry charge. They'd been watching, waiting for exactly this moment, when they could claim to be protecting a white settler from a hostile war party. "Apaches!" Morrison shouted, raising his rifle. "They got Harrison and the breed." The forest erupted in gunfire. Sam dove for cover behind his woodpile, pulling Ayanna with him as bullets whined overhead and chipped bark from the cabin walls. The Apache warriors scattered into the trees, returning fire with deadly accuracy that spoke of years of guerrilla warfare. In the chaos, Sam saw Morrison taking careful aim at Ayanna, his face twisted with hatred for everything the young man represented. Without thinking, Sam threw himself forward, his own rifle coming up just as Morrison's finger tightened on the trigger. The two shots rang out almost simultaneously. Morrison's bullet carved a furrow along Sam's ribs, spinning him around but not dropping him. Sam's shot took Morrison center mass, lifting the rancher from his saddle and sending him crashing to the ground. "Sam!" Ayanna's voice cut through the battle noise. The young man was kneeling beside the cabin, his rifle steady as he provided covering fire for his wounded friend. The battle continued for nearly an hour, a running firefight through the forest that left 2 of Morrison's men dead and at least 1 Apache warrior wounded. But gradually, the shooting died away as both sides disengaged, neither willing to pay the price for total victory. As silence returned to the mountain, Sam found himself sitting with his back against the cabin wall, Ayanna bandaging his wounded side with steady hands. "You saved my life," Ayanna said quietly. "You'd have done the same for me." Cochise emerged from the trees, alone now, his war paint streaked with sweat and his eyes holding a new respect as he looked at the white lumberjack who had bled to protect his nephew. "You fought well, white man," Cochise said, "but this changes nothing. The boy must choose." Sam struggled to his feet, supported by Ayanna's strong arm. He already has chosen. He chose peace over war, understanding over hatred. Maybe it's time you respected that choice. And what of you, Lumberjack? Will you die for this choice of his? Sam looked at Ayanna, this young man who had already shown more courage and wisdom than most people displayed in a lifetime. If that's what it takes to see him safely away from here, then yes. For a long moment, Cochise studied them both. Then slowly, he began to remove his war paint with a handful of wet leaves, each stroke seeming to wash away years of accumulated anger and grief. "My sister's son," he said finally, looking directly at Ayanna. "You have found a father among your enemies and chosen a path I cannot follow. I release you from obligation to the tribe, but I do not release you from my love." The old warrior turned and walked back into the forest, disappearing as silently as he had come. In the distance, Sam could hear the sound of horses as the surviving members of Morrison's group retreated toward town, no doubt already planning their version of events for the territorial authorities. As the sun began to set over the mountains, casting long shadows across the battlefield, Sam and Ayanna prepared to leave the cabin that had briefly been their sanctuary. They had won this fight, but the war between their peoples would continue, and there would be no safe place for them in this territory. "Where will we go?" Ayanna asked as they loaded their supplies onto Sam's mule. Sam looked toward the western mountains, where new territories beckoned and a man could start fresh if he had the courage to try. "California," he said. "I hear they're hiring loggers in the redwood forests, and a man's past doesn't matter much if he can work hard and keep his word." As they walked away from the cabin, neither man looked back. Behind them lay a life of violence and division. Ahead lay the uncertain promise of a future they would build together, one day at a time. 6 months later, the morning fog rolled in from the Pacific Ocean like a gray blanket, wrapping around the towering redwoods of Northern California. Sam Harrison stood at the edge of a logging camp, watching his crew prepare for another day's work in the ancient forest. At his side, Ayanna, now calling himself John Harrison at Sam's suggestion, supervised the maintenance of the steam donkey engine that hauled massive logs down the mountainside. The camp was different from anything either man had known in Arizona. Here, among the tallest trees on earth, the scale of everything was magnified. The redwoods they felled were so large that 20 men could stand inside the hollow stumps, and the work required a different kind of respect for the forest than Sam had ever practiced. John had proven himself quickly among the loggers, his strength and intelligence earning the grudging respect of men who cared more about a man's ability to do the job than the color of his skin or the mystery of his past. He had a natural understanding of mechanical things, and his quiet competence had made him indispensable to the operation. But the peace they had found was fragile, built on the foundation of lies and half-truths that were sometimes necessary for survival. To the other loggers, John was simply Sam's adopted son, a young man of uncertain heritage who had proved himself worthy of the Harrison name. Only Sam and John knew the full truth of their journey, from the Arizona mountains to this misty coast. The work was dangerous and demanding. Every day brought the risk of widowmakers, dead branches that could fall without warning, and the constant threat of massive trees going wrong during the cut, crushing anyone unfortunate enough to be in their path. But it was honest work that paid well, and it allowed both men to start building new lives, far from the violence they had left behind. On this particular morning, their carefully constructed peace was shattered by the arrival of a familiar face. Jake Morrison, his right arm hanging useless from Sam's bullet 6 months earlier, rode into camp on a lathered horse, his eyes burning with the fever of a man who had traveled 1,000 miles for revenge. "I knew I'd find you eventually, Harrison," Morrison called out, his voice carrying across the camp and drawing the attention of every logger within earshot. "You and your pet Indian." Sam stepped forward, his hand moving instinctively toward the axe at his belt. Around them, work stopped as the other men sensed the tension crackling between the two figures. "Morrison, thought you were dead. Takes more than one bullet to kill a Morrison." Jake's good hand rested on his gun. "But took me months to track you down, but I never forgot what you cost me. My brother's death, my arm, and the respect of every decent white man in Arizona territory." John moved to stand beside Sam, his own hand ready for trouble. The young man had filled out during their months in California, the hard physical work adding muscle to his frame and confidence to his bearing. He was no longer the frightened boy chained to a tree. He was a man prepared to fight for the life he had built. "This doesn't involve you, boy," Morrison snarled. "This is between me and the man who chose Indians over his own kind." "That's where you're wrong," John said quietly. "Sam Harrison is my family. That makes it my fight, too." The camp had gone completely silent now, 30 loggers forming a rough circle around the confrontation. These were hard men who had seen their share of violence, but they also valued loyalty and respected the bonds between men who worked and bled together. Morrison's laugh was bitter as winter wind. "Family? You really think this half-breed savage is your son, Harrison? You really think?" He never finished the sentence. John moved faster than Morrison could follow, closing the distance between them in 2 quick steps and driving his fist into the rancher's jaw with all the strength built by months of swinging axes and hauling logs. Morrison went down hard, his head striking a redwood stump with a sound like a melon hitting stone. For a moment, he lay still, and Sam thought John might have killed him. Then Morrison groaned and rolled over, blood streaming from his nose and mouth. "You're not welcome here," Sam said, his voice carrying the authority of a man who had earned his place among these loggers through sweat and skill. "Mount up and ride out, or we'll carry you out." Morrison struggled to his feet, supported by sheer will and hatred, but he was one man against 30, and even his rage couldn't overcome those odds. As he climbed back onto his horse, he fixed both Sam and John with a stare full of poison. "This isn't over," he promised. "There's no place in this country for men who turn their backs on their own race. No place at all." As Morrison rode away, disappearing into the morning fog like a bad dream, the camp slowly returned to normal. But Sam could see the questions in some of the men's eyes, the doubts that Morrison's words had planted. The truth about John's heritage had been revealed, and not all of their fellow workers would be comfortable with that knowledge. That evening, as they sat by their cabin fire, Sam broached the subject that had been weighing on both their minds. "Some of the men will have problems with what Morrison said," Sam observed. "There might be trouble." John poked at the fire with a stick, sending sparks spiraling up into the darkness. "I've been thinking about that too. Maybe it's time for me to move on, find work somewhere else." "Like hell." Sam's voice was firm. "We came here together, and we'll stay together. Besides, most of these men have worked alongside you for months. They know what kind of man you are." As if summoned by their conversation, footsteps approached through the darkness. Big Mike O'Sullivan, the camp foreman and a man whose word carried weight with every logger on the mountain, emerged from the shadows with 3 other crew leaders behind him. Sam tensed, ready for trouble, but O'Sullivan's weathered face wore a slight smile. "We've been talking," the Irishman said in his thick brogue, "about what that snake Morrison said today." "And?" Sam asked. "And we figure it's none of our damn business where John came from or who his people were." O'Sullivan looked directly at the young man. "We only care about whether he pulls his weight and watches our backs in the woods. Far as we can see, he does both." The other foreman nodded agreement. Tom Bradley, a grizzled veteran of a dozen logging camps, spat into the fire. "Best donkey engine operator we've had in years. Man who can keep that steam devil running smooth deserves respect, not questions about his bloodline." Relief flooded through Sam like cool water. These men had seen past the prejudices that drove Morrison and his kind, recognizing the simple truth that character mattered more than ancestry. As the weeks passed, life in the logging camp settled into a comfortable routine. John continued to excel at his work, eventually taking over as head of maintenance for all the camp's equipment. Sam found himself training younger loggers in the art of reading the forest, teaching them to see the subtle signs that could mean the difference between a clean cut and a deadly accident. They built a life together, not the one either had planned, but one that gave both purpose and peace. In the evenings, they would sit by their fire and talk about the future, about the mill they might build someday, about the family John would eventually raise when he found the right woman. The past wasn't forgotten, but it no longer defined them. They had crossed a continent to escape the violence and hatred that had threatened to destroy them both, and in doing so, they had discovered something precious. That family wasn't just about blood, but about choice. The choice to stand by someone when the world turned against them, to sacrifice for their well-being, and to build something better together than either could achieve alone. As autumn painted the mountainsides in shades of gold and crimson, Sam Harrison looked at the young man he had rescued from certain death and saw not just a survivor, but a son. And John Harrison, looking back at the weathered lumberjack who had risked everything for a stranger, saw not just a savior, but a father. In the shadow of the ancient redwoods, 2 men from different worlds had found their way home, not to a place, but to each other, and to the understanding that sometimes the greatest courage comes not from standing with your own people, but from standing up for what is right, regardless of the cost. The forest around them held its own ancient wisdom, having witnessed countless generations of struggle and survival. In its patient embrace, Sam and John Harrison continued to build their new life, one day at a time, knowing that they had found something worth fighting for, the simple, profound truth that love and loyalty could triumph over hatred and fear, if men were willing to pay the price for peace.